freedom of information right under MFIPA is very, very broad. One thing you have to remember is that this applies only to recorded information. Now, recorded information can be paper documents, it can be audio tapes, it can be videotapes, but it doesn't apply to information that may not be in existence. It doesn't require you to go take a poll of teachers in the school because somebody wants to know what they think about something. It doesn't require you to make documents. It just requires you to disclose the documents that are in your possession at the time of the request, subject to all the exceptions. So, how do you handle an FOI request when it comes across your desk? Well, first off, you want to make sure that the request is in writing. If the request isn't in writing, if somebody just gives you a call or leaves you a voicemail and says that I want to get X, Y, and Z, that's not sufficient. You want the request should be in writing, and to be honest, it should be clear as to what they're looking for. They also have to pay up. They have to satisfy the fees of a Freedom of Information request, and I'll get to fees a little bit later, but this isn't something you have to do for free. This is something that if somebody wants the documents, they're going to have to be willing to pay for your time and expense and effort in order to delve into your records in order to find the documents. So that's something that some people don't necessarily always think about. This isn't a free right of access. This is a paid right of access. The other thing that is important is that these have to be documents that are in your custody or your control. They can't start asking you to go to every other school board in the province in order to dig up this information. If they want information from York Region and they're asking Toronto District, go to York Region and get it. We're not going to get it for you. The information, as I said, has to be in the form of a record. It has to be something that you can handle, something that you can actually hand over, that you can copy. It can't be, I want to have a sit down with this person in the administration in order to discuss something. That's not the information that this this applicant is entitled to. And of course, it can't be frivolous and vexatious. I hope you don't have these sorts of people, but these sorts of people do exist, who want the information. They want the information so bad, but the information doesn't exist, and you've told them 100 times it doesn't exist, and they've made hundreds of requests and it doesn't exist, and they just keep requesting the information or requesting more information to the point where it's not even that they want the information, it's that they want to bug you. And you don't have to provide information where it's a frivolous and vexatious request, where you have somebody who's a repeat quote-unquote offender, and they're really just trying to disrupt the system as opposed to access information. Those sorts of decisions where you find that somebody's frivolous and vexatious and say, no, we're not going to give this information to you, those are the sorts of situations that'll probably end up before the Privacy Commissioner, but hopefully they're the rare occurrence in your lives. Now, in terms of the scope and clarity of the request, I'm sure that you've run into this, where somebody will make a request of you and it'll just be overly broad. I want all of the documents. I want all of the records. What is it that they actually want? What particular piece of information are they actually looking for? You have an ability to, quote-unquote, bargain with the person, to talk to them and say, look, what is it that you actually want? Because I can find you, these 2 pieces of paper you're looking for, but why do I have to hand over the entire banker's box? The whole idea is that under MFIPA is that you should be restricting the scope of disclosure as much as possible to what is really needed, to what is really necessary, to what's really being requested. Sometimes you'll receive a request that's unclear. It's unclear because the person doesn't really know what they want. They just know they want something. So you can talk to the person and say, okay, what is it that you're actually looking for? Clarify this for me. And to be honest, if you receive an unclear freedom of information request, you shouldn't just hand it all over because you don't understand it. Talk to the person and see if you can bargain an adequate solution to the issue. See if you can figure out exactly what they want. Another issue is that it might just be so costly to provide everything they want that they may agree to something less than everything they want because it's just going to cost them too much. So talk to them and figure out what the real issues are and what they really look to get, and that should help limit the amount of digging that you have to do and also limit the amount of paper that you have to hand over. In terms of time limits, once you've received a request, you normally have 30 days to comply, provide an answer to the individual. That may be a yes, that may be a no. That also may be a, we need more time. And you do have a right under the Act to request an extension. You have to notify the individual that you want an extension. And an extension can only be requested where the records that you're asking for are either so large and voluminous that it's going to take more time to put everything together, which is a reasonable requirement, or where you may have to consult with somebody from outside the organization in order to deal with the request. In those instances, you have to provide the notice to the individual that it's going to take us this long, and you can specify an amount of time, but once you've specified that amount of time, that's your extension. So ensure that it's the time you require and that time is actually going to be adequate for you. You have to tell them that this is the reason for the extension request, and this is what we need to do. Now, when there's an affected party, and I'll talk about affected parties in a moment, but that's essentially third parties or individuals whose personal information is being requested, who isn't the individual themselves, where you have one of these affected parties and you are going to make disclosure, or you will likely make disclosure, you have an obligation to inform that affected party that you might be disclosing their personal information, or you might be disclosing the confidential, high-level financial information of a quote-unquote third party. In those instances, you get an extension from the day that you provide notice to the third party for another 30 days in order to get a response from the third party and then either disclose or not disclose the information. That 30 days, it's 20 days for the third party. The third party gets to make a response to you and make submissions as to why you shouldn't disclose the information, or they may just give their consent. But that gives them a chance to reply and gives you more time to actually consider whether this information should actually just be disclosed to the applicant. After those 30 days are up, you have to give the applicant a response one way or another. And as I noted before, you can charge fees. The regulations under MFIPA set out what you can charge for what. And it covers hours spent searching, it covers the cost of having to put the records together, it covers copying and shipping and all those sorts of things. You have to provide an estimate to the employee, or not the employee, the applicant, when you're dealing with an estimate that's going to be more than $25. And that gives them the benefit of being able to decide whether this is actually worth it. Again, some of those people who may be on the line of frivolous and vexatious may say, I didn't know this was going to cost me $200 in order to get that entire box of documents. Forget it. Other people, it's necessary and important to them in terms of what other processes they may be going through. They may be going through some sort of litigation of their own. They may need these documents, and it may be worth the $50, $100 in order to get that needle in a haystack that they're asking you to look for. Now, affected persons. First thing to remember about the third parties and individuals that I was talking about before are If you know you're already going to deny access to the documents because of their particular nature or what they contain, you don't have to provide the notice to them. You can just deny it and tell the affected the applicant that they aren't going to get the documents. However, if there is a chance that you are going to be disclosing this information, you have to tell the third party or the person in question that this information might be disclosed and give them that opportunity to comment, as I was talking about. Now, in terms of third-party information, that falls under Section 10 of the Act. And third-party information is essentially commercial, financial, scientific information of a company or of an individual, information that has a high value financial importance to them. Likewise, as I'll discuss in detail in a minute, if you are being requested to provide personal information about somebody, and as we talked before, personal information is home address, phone number, medical records, etc. If you're being requested to provide that information, you have to tell the person that it relates to before you disclose that information. And this is all on a quote-unquote might contain standard. If the record that's being requested might contain personal information, you have to inform the person that it might contain that information. It's a very low standard. So this creates a strong obligation on you to review the records that you're being asked to disclose and to inform the people that they might deal with accordingly. So once you've made your decision, yes or no, you have to provide notice within 30 days to the individual. A decision letter should be sent out. It's just not a phone call or an email. You have to send a formal letter telling the person exactly why they are or are not getting the information. It may be that the record doesn't exist. That may be because it never existed. That may be because it was destroyed in the normal course. It really doesn't matter. But once you've found out that it doesn't exist, that can be your reason, and that is sufficient. And you have to tell them, if it doesn't exist, that they have a right to appeal the decision to the privacy commissioner, and if they appeal it, then you get into that appeals process. If you decide that you're not going to provide it to them, but it does exist, you have to give them the specific reason, the specific exclusion under the Act, the section, and how it applies to that documentation. So it may be that, the best example is personal information. It may be that it's personal information, their personal medical records, which are presumed to be excluded, and you just aren't going to provide that information to the person under Section 14. That's sufficient. You tell them that, and you tell them that if they disagree with your decision, they can file an appeal with the privacy commissioner. Now, in terms of access to the documents, copies are the norm. You have an obligation under the Act to provide them with a copy of the document or documents that they've asked for. In certain instances, it may not be reasonably practicable to provide those copies. They may be asking for bound volumes of information. They may be asking for things that you just can't provide a copy of. You may have documents that are old or fragile that that can't go through the process of being copied. In those sorts of instances, you inform them that you can't provide them a copy, but they still have a presumptive right to see the document if you aren't going to provide them a copy. The main issue there is security. I mean, if this person's going to is a security risk, or if the person is they're just coming into a security sensitive aspect of your organization that outsiders just aren't allowed into, those may be roadblocks to actually coming in and seeing the document for themselves. But otherwise, there is a presumptive right that this person who's made the request, if you're not going to give them a copy, should be able to come in and at least see the document. And In the case of very large requests and very large documents, it may be that they just want a portion of that copied, and they have a right under the Act, upon viewing the document, to have a portion of it copied. Again, if that is reasonably practicable. If it just isn't possible, or it's so costly, or there may be, again, the condition of the document may not be adequate for copying even a portion of it, those may be roadblocks to actually providing that information to them in a hard copy that they can take home with them. But otherwise, there is an obligation to provide them with that information and to give them a take-home, if you will. Now, of course, you don't have to provide them everything. There are 3 mandatory exceptions, and I'm going to talk to those primarily because they're the ones that may actually touch on your organizations, and they're the ones that are most difficult to navigate. There are 9 discretionary exemptions, and those discretionary exemptions are in the Act. They're fairly straightforward when you read the Act, and I'm not going to go through them just for the sake of letting you out in a timely fashion today. But in terms of the exemptions, there's a duty to disclose as much as possible. If you can sever the information that is exempted, you should sever the information. Again, if you've got a 10-page document and 9 of the pages don't contain any of the information that is exempted, and it's only that 1 page that has information that falls under the exemptions, you should allow the person to see the 9 pages that don't fall under the exemption. They have a broad right to that. The one exemption that I imagine you deal with mostly in the instance of a school board is personal information. Under the Act, there is a presumed invasion of an individual's privacy where they're seeking the sorts of information I have listed up there. Obviously, if you are seeking somebody's medical information, their psychological history, psychiatric treatments, their current medical condition, seeking that information is presumed to be an unjustified invasion of privacy. Likewise, if somebody has applied for social services or welfare benefits, that information should be withheld as an unjustified invasion of privacy. Of course, on the flip side, there are things that are presumed not to be an unjustified invasion of somebody's privacy. Disclosure of somebody's salary range or benefits or their employment duties and responsibilities, the position and obligations of officers or employees of your institution. Those sorts of purely job-related information, those pieces of data are not presumed to be personal. Now, the other mandatory exemptions under the Act are the third-party exemption that we talked about before. And again, that relates, the key elements in this are, whether the release of this information will cause some sort of harm or loss to the organization that you're releasing it about. Likewise, information about intergovernmental relations, which may or may not touch on what you do to a certain extent in terms of the ministry communications between different ministries. That information is also presumed to be exempt. Of course, there's always an exception, and that's the public interest override. Now, when I first heard about that, it sounds like a video game, but it's really more complicated than that. This applies to certain exemptions in the Act, and those are advice to government, relations with government, the third-party exception, economic interest information, information that may pose a danger to life and safety, or personal privacy information. The public interest override applies where the disclosure of that information would benefit the public interest to an extent that would outweigh the individual's right to privacy. Now, this is the sort of decision that I don't expect any of you in this room to make. in this room, I expect that you would be making the decision, no, the personal information, the medical records, those are exempt. There's no reason that they should be seeking them. And if you want to challenge that, go to the Privacy Commissioner. And then the Privacy Commissioner is the person who'd be saying, no, there is a strong public interest in having these documents released that outweighs the person's personal desire to have it remain exempt. So the public interest override is something that you should remember and that you should think about and keep in the back of your mind. But I would never expect you to write a letter to a person saying the personal information, oh, this is personal information, so it's exempt, but the public interest requires its release. Now, in terms of employment and labor documents, Section 52 of the Act excludes records in relation to employment or labor proceedings or anticipated proceedings. So you don't necessarily have to release documents that relate to an arbitration matter that's upcoming. Obviously, there are disclosure requirements in the arbitration process, but if an outsider is requesting those documents, you don't have to provide them as they're, again, necessary for the litigation purpose. Also, information that is central to the negotiation of a collective bargaining agreement or an employment contract, those sorts of documents may not have to be disclosed under Section 52. Also, any documents, notes, agendas about labor and employment issues in which your organization has high interest, those sorts of documents also are not covered by the Act and thus are not the content of the disclosure requirements or the access requirements or any of the requirements. And as I noted, there's, of course, the frivolous and vexatious request. This deals with the pests that I was talking about before. And when somebody's been pestering you or they have some sort of ulterior motive in seeking the documentation, that is when you can deny access because they're a frivolous or vexatious applicant. Now, of course, when you do that, you're going to have to assume that you're going to end up before the Privacy Commissioner. It's more than likely if somebody is out there enough that they are willing to try to ruin your organization's day by continually providing or requesting information that has absolutely no importance to them, and they're just doing it to disturb your daily lives. They're probably going to be willing to disturb your daily lives more by going to the Privacy Commissioner and dragging you into a process down there. So that's just something to keep in mind, but sometimes it's necessary. It's necessary to have the Privacy Commissioner agree with you and say, yes, this person is a quote-unquote pest. Thanks.